It's time for the chip race.
For strategy this week, we are going back in time to September 2009 and the full Tilt Espana Series Barcelona. I got heads up in this tourney, and there was one crucial hand that I have to say has always haunted me, so I thought I'd get Dara to take a deep dive into the hand and into my line. Dara, thank you for doing this.
Hi David, delighted to be here and delighted to be reviewing younger...
Skinnier.
Younger, skinnier, less alcoholic Lappin.
I don't know about that second part. Also, what I thought might be a bit of fun as well is I actually found my notes in an old blog. So I actually know my thought process at the time as well. I'll sprinkle those notes into the telling of the hand. We'll get straight to it. The blinds are 25k, 50k, no ante. We are basically playing heads up for about 10 grand. A little bit of business was done. It was 60k for second and 100k for first. We'd agreed a 81.69 chop playing on for 10. The stacks are me with 2.75 million, that's 55 big blinds, and Cesar Lopez with 1.25 million, that's 25 big blinds. Cesar 3x's the button to 150k, and I call with the ace of clubs, 4 of clubs. We started heads up 2.2 million to 1.8 million. I had 1-4 of the first 5 pots, all sort of small ball. I was min-raising my buttons. He was limping all of his. Firstly, Dara, ace-4 suited here against the 3x. He's only got 25 bigs. Should I have just shoved here? I know that's what I would do against a lot of opponents. I know that's what I would have done against a lot of opponents even then. I do have fold equity, and I do have a hand that plays pretty well against a calling range.
Yeah, I think at equilibrium, this hand can either be shoved or just called. I think the reason why you want to have it in both ranges is that if you shove all your aces, for example, then when you don't shove and the board comes ace high, you can't really have it. So it makes sense to have the hand in both ranges. The thing which jumped out at me was just Cesar's very big sizing for a 25 big blind stack. I could see myself going either way, and probably if I was playing against Doug Polk or somebody, I'd actually mix so that he can't range me too easily based on my preflop. But against a 3x, I think I would definitely just shove because there's extra money out there. You're being asked to put in 2 big blinds. You're going to miss the flop 2 times out of 3. You're out of position. I mean, you have the type of hand that realizes equity better than most, but you're still going to under-realize equity out of position. Whereas when you shove, if you get called, you're going to have pretty good equity. In fact, you can even get called by worse. You can get called by stuff like King Queen. And when he folds, that's a very big win for you. You basically add almost 20% of the effective stack.
Yeah, it was certainly a tempting proposition. I think at the time I was turned off by the fact that he 3x'd, and previously, and it was a very small sample size heads up, but maybe in the previous 3 heads up hands we'd played, he'd limped each time playing off that or slightly larger stack. So I felt as though, okay, this is a bit different. The 3x now, people will interpret that in different ways, and possibly I should have been more open to the fact that this was him just as likely to be 3xing a hand that he didn't want to play a flop with as it was 3xing a hand for strength to try and juice up a pot with a hand he was very happy with. I think he can go both ways on that. But in game anyway, I did go for the flat, as you mentioned there, Dara, and I suppose it's not bad, while at the same time I do totally see the benefits of the other side of it. To the flop, the pot is 300k, and it comes the ace of diamonds, king of hearts, queen of hearts. I check, and he quickly checks back. I don't have any leads on this board, so I assume my line is fine here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is just a horrendous board for you because so many of your hands that hit this board would have shoved pre-flop. You don't have aces, probably. You don't have kings or queens. You don't have ace king or ace queen. And he has all those hands. So this is a spot where, irrespective of what your hand is, you just have to check.
Yeah, and as I said, he does check back. Let's move straight to the turn. The pot is still 300k, and it comes the 4 of diamonds. With 2 pair now, I decide to lead out for 200k into 300. Okay, so here's my notes from 2009, Dara. I interpreted his quick check back on the flop as a value hand, as I think he would have stabbed with his air, targeting king 10, queen jack type stuff, and maybe a weak ace. I thought I was certain to get 1 street, so I wanted to make it a decent sizing now on the turn. Dara, your thoughts to my 2009 analysis there?
Yeah, I mean, that's surprisingly good. Like, I do think you're right. This is such a good board for him that if he's missed it completely, he would almost certainly c-bet. And that would still be the case today. I think nowadays, probably people would just go ahead and c-bet anyway, even if they have value. But back then, people played a little bit differently. So, I think that part of the analysis is very good. And also then you do have in mind the hands that you're targeting. It would be very, very rare for somebody who's the pre-flop aggressor to get this board and give up to one bet. So it's almost inconceivable he's going to fold. And the interesting thing for me then was, given that, first of all, you went for a chunky sizing, the solver actually prefers an even bigger sizing.
Wow.
The solver goes for an overbet in this spot, 1.2x pot, because, we've taken a street out on the flop. We have a hand which we're now very willing to get stacks in with. There's so many worse hands that can call us. Apart from all the one pair hands, we're even ahead of, king, queen, for example. So we're basically just trying to get the money in now. And the best way to do that is to bet big. The solver doesn't bet very much on this card because, it's still a bad board for us, but it does have leads with its value and appropriate bluffs, and it's going for big because the hands that we are betting for value are very strong hands. Our marginal hands are still going to try and get to showdown.
And just from a hypothetical standpoint, how do I balance out a bet here? Do I have to put in hands that have draws but not too good a draw because I don't want to get blown off them?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Usually the way you construct your range in these spots is your very strongest hands you're betting for value. The next class of hands below that, say weak one pair hands or very strong draws, you check, intending to check call. And then the hands just below that aren't quite strong enough to check call, which will usually be weak draws, they go into your bluffing range. And the reason why we use those hands is that if we do get called, we do have some prospects. So we have lots of gutters, any jack, any 10, and we have some wheel draws as well, say 5-3 suited. And the reason we use those hands is we can consider bluffing certain rivers because we'll get to the river with, 5 high or whatever, but we can also ping a miracle gutter and get the rest of the chips.
Very good. Well, in response to my bet of 200k, which I did at the time think was a chunky one, Cesar raised to 600k, more than half of his remaining 1.1 million chips. Here are my notes again. I don't think Cesar was stack size aware from what I had seen earlier on the final table. And there was a spot six-handed where he raised a wonky amount and priced himself into a call with a draw, which he actually hit. For that reason, I thought I had to shove or fold in this spot. Dara, was that flawed logic from David 12 years ago, or is that also reasonable analysis?
It's slightly flawed in the sense, what does the shove achieve that the call doesn't? Mostly it just takes away his ability to bluff. Like if he is just on a completely mad one where he's decided, this guy's full of shit, this is not his board, I'm raising, and you shove, he's going to fold away his air. And I think the value hands that he has, some of which are worse than yours, ace jack, ace 10, king queen, those types of hands, they're going to get it in on the river anyway. So they're kind of immaterial. All the chips are going in anyway, regardless of how you play the hand. So I think there is a case for calling as well, just to allow him to bluff. That would require you to know where his bluffs are coming from. Like the logical place for his bluffs to come from are, maybe stuff like 10-9 suited, jack-9 suited, those types of hands that just have gut shots that can't call, but raise hoping to get you to fold. And if you do call, can hit the river. So if you get a middling card on the river, you can check call, hoping that he continues to bluff.
That makes a lot of sense. I think if I recall how I was proceeding back then in these types of spots, my logic would have been, I've seen him make these plays with draws that he's now priced himself in with the draw rather than going all in himself. So I want to make sure that I at least price him in with all the draws. So if he does have 15 or 20%, I get all the money in now. And then he doesn't have like 10 big blinds to make a comeback afterwards. Whereas maybe if he was left with 10 bigs on the river, he wouldn't go for the bluff anymore because he'd go, well, look, it looks too much like I've got value and he's, not going to be able to put a bet that would get me off it. So he might just save those chips. Is there anything to that logic? Because I still think even if that's wrong, it's probably how some people still think today, even if my own thought processes are a little sharper.
I mean, if he has a flush draw, he's just about getting the right equity. Yeah, this reminds me that people always focus on flush draws back then. That was the only thing anybody could ever have.
And you know what? It was also playing massively in my mind because that's exactly what he did have in a hand maybe an hour and a half earlier, where he made this wonky raise size with a flush draw, priced himself in, the guy shoves, he goes into the tank kind of grimacing and groaning, but once he flipped up the hand, it was kind of like, well, you made your bed, mate, you had to call it off now with your whatever for 20%. He pings the flush draw, which is why he was still in the tournament, but that was looming in my head probably larger than it should have.
Yeah, like if you think about the total range, like it's very hard to have a flush draw. 75% of the time we don't start suited cards, and we can have any of the 4 suits. So the chance that we have the actual suit that is the flush draw is essentially a 6%er. Whereas you think about all the gut shots you can have, any hand that has a jack in it, any hand that has a 10 in it, that's a much bigger part of the range. So I think that's what we should be focusing on rather than the flush draw.
No, I like that. Well, in the end, I did go into the tank, but I eventually shoved for the effective 1.1 million. He called and he tabled the Jack of Diamonds, 10 of Clubs for a trapped, flopped straight. That gave me just 10% equity with my 2 pair. The river was an 8 of Hearts. I did not take down the tournament there in that moment, nor did I take it down at all. He actually coolered me a few hands later. His Ace King getting in against my Ace Queen for 25 odd big blinds, a pretty standard spot. But look, it was a really fascinating one to glimpse back on. I actually spotted the hand had re-emerged as a video on YouTube recently. It had previously been on some rogue Spanish poker website, and I used to be able to glance at it once in a while for posterity. That site vanished off the face of the earth, but this one has just popped up on YouTube, and I was able to revisit this moment again and be haunted all over again by this hand. So I suppose in a way I'm really happy by your analysis that you just feel, well, there's nothing I could have done. I'm basically committed with this hand. It's just too strong ultimately not to essentially get it in some form or another, whether that be get it in there and then or call and then call it off on the river.
Yeah, when we talked about this off air, you said afterwards you were haunted by the idea that you might have found a fold. And I think that's a very common human reaction. When we lose a big hand, we get very results based and we think, well, if I'd folded, I would have saved chips and that would have been a good outcome. So maybe I should have done that. And we struggle to find ways. But I mean, the thing is, like, if you're going to fold this hand, what exactly are you calling with? Are you just going to call with a straight then? This is a question I always pose to my students who are sort of getting into game theory. It's like, don't play in a certain way that your opponent can just bet or shove with any 2 cards. Because if you do, particularly heads up where you're playing every hand, people will pick up on your tendencies very quickly and they'll just run over you. You have to call often enough. For the odds that they're getting, you're calling more than that percentage of time, minimum defense frequency.
Yeah, I will admit that at the time, my game wasn't built around thinking in GTO sense. Back then, of course, it was a long time before that word even sort of entered the poker nomenclature. But you're absolutely right. I don't have Ace King. I don't have Ace Queen. I possibly have a trapped top set of aces once in a blue moon. I have maybe King 4 suited and I have Ace 4. And I have Jack 10. So, like, it's just so high up on the range of the hands that I can have. It's probably the second best hand I can have. Because Pocket 4s obviously goes in pre as well. So, I think, yeah, on the basis of that, I can have 10 Jack as my only better hand than this. And I really have to be calling with more than just my best possible hand.
Yeah. If your strategy is only call when you have the nuts, you're not going to do very well in poker.
Well, let that be the lesson to you all out there. Sometimes you need to call when you don't have the nuts. And sometimes you needed the nuts and you just have to live with yourself. Dara O'Kearney, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As Doug Polk says, sometimes it's just your time to die.
Indeed.